The whole town warned him that the observatory on the hill was cursed, and now he knows why. A lonely veteran moved to Fairbanks, buying the abandoned Northstar Point Observatory for almost nothing, hoping to escape his past. But when his loyal German shepherd started sniffing the basement wall, not barking, just shaking, he knew something was wrong. Behind the stone was a hidden room sealed for over 50 years, and inside it lay a secret that powerful people tried to bury, one that could protect a sacred land or destroy it forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, your city, state, or country. It's incredible to see how far these stories travel. James Harris drove slowly along the narrow, ice-slick road that curled upward like a frozen serpent toward the Northstar Point Observatory. The old Ford pickup rattled and shuddered beneath him, its heater gasping against the brutal Alaska winter. At 67, James carried the years heavily. His once broad shoulders had thinned with age, yet they still held the stubborn posture of a soldier who had never quite learned how to stand at ease. A thick beard peppered with white framed his jaw, and his short graying hair peeked from beneath a wool cap. His face, carved by decades of hardship, was defined by deep creases that spoke of sleepless nights and memories that refused to fade. Wrapped tightly around him was his signature red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket, a garment as tough and weather-beaten as its owner. Beside him, perched on the worn passenger seat, was Max, his German shepherd, 4 years old, with a dense sable coat and alert golden-brown eyes that missed nothing. Max was large and powerful, muscles rippling beneath fur, like a silent promise of loyalty. He held himself in a poised and controlled manner, as though he sensed every shift in the air. Though a young dog, his gaze carried wisdom, far greater than his years, shaped by the nights he had nudged his master awake from terrors. James never spoke aloud. Max was not merely a pet. He was the tether that kept James from drifting back into the darker parts of his own mind. As the truck climbed higher, the radio sputtered into static before dying completely. The isolation of the mountains grew heavier with each turn, as if the world behind them was fading away. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had chosen to leave behind a life that no longer had room for him. Chosen silence over sympathy, solitude over forced smiles. Fairbanks, for all its rugged charm, held too many people who looked at him like he was broken. Veterans' home, disability office, support groups, hospitals with sterile rooms and walls painted too white to feel real. He had tried each of them, none had helped him outrun the ghosts waiting behind his eyelids. "Almost there, boy," he whispered, his voice rough from years without conversation. Max's ears twitched at the sound, and he scooted closer, resting his head briefly on James's thigh. That simple touch slowed the pounding in James's chest, a reminder that he was not entirely alone in this fight. The final turn revealed the observatory, a gray and weather-worn structure, perched on the mountain's spine like the skull of some ancient beast. The once brilliant copper dome had oxidized into dull green, streaked with black from decades of snow and silence. Windows were clouded with grime and frost, reflecting nothing but the harsh world around them. The building looked forgotten, a monument to abandoned dreams. Locals had warned him about this place. They whispered in diners and gas stations that the observatory hummed at night, that something beneath it pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth. They told stories of the last astronomer who lived here disappearing without a trace. They said the ground itself spoke in a language no human was meant to understand. But James was drawn to things the world preferred to look away from. He stepped out of the truck. The cold slapped him instantly, biting at his cheeks and numbing his fingers even through thick gloves. Max leapt down behind him, paws crunching into the untouched snow. Together they trudged toward the entrance. Every step James took made him more aware of the silence. There was no birdsong, no distant highway, No human presence at all, only the low howl of the wind rolling down from the mountains. It was a silence so complete it felt like a physical force pressing gently but insistently against his thoughts. A silence he had craved for years. He reached the main wall of the observatory. The stone was ice-cold beneath his palm, rough with age and grit. Something vibrated faintly subtle, rhythmic, like the pulse of a creature deep beneath the ground. He froze. Was it the wind, the shifting of the structure in the cold, or something else entirely? Max stiffened, ears raised sharply. The dog's gaze followed the wall downward, nose quivering as if he sensed a presence moving beneath the concrete. A soft, uneasy whine escaped his throat. James knelt beside him, brushing fingers through the dog's thick fur. "Easy," he murmured. "Just an old building settling in." But he didn't believe his own words. As he looked across the vast snowy horizon, memory surged without warning. A flash of fluorescent lights, a sterile control room, buried underground, the hypnotic hum of machines, the screen showing distant figures who had no idea death hovered above them. His finger pressing a button. The explosion blooming like a cruel flower. Silence. Silence louder than any scream. His breath quickened, chest tightening, as the old panic slipped its claws into him. The ground beneath his boots felt unstable, tilting, dragging him not into a hole but into the past. Max pushed into his chest with sudden force, knocking the panic's grip loose. The dog's warm breath puffed into James's face, eyes steady, present, real. James shut his eyes, inhaling deeply. One breath. Another. He was here. In the snow. Beneath a gray sky, not there. Not anymore. He rose slowly and placed his hand once more against the stone wall, not to test the vibration, but to ground himself. The cold radiated into his palm, anchoring him. After several long moments, he whispered only for Max and the wind to hear, "We're home now." He turned toward the door, fishing a heavy iron key from his coat pocket. The lock protested, but finally gave way with a groan, as though the building itself resented the intrusion. The smell that drifted out was one of stale air dust and long-forgotten secrets. James flicked on his flashlight. A narrow hallway stretched forward, walls lined with peeling paint and rusted cables like veins in an old body. Every inch of the place felt abandoned, yet watched. Max stayed close, paws silent on the cracked tile floor. His tail was low, not tucked in fear, but poised ready. James felt his pulse calm beneath the steady weight of purpose. Fixing this place, repairing something real, might just repair a piece of himself. He stepped inside his shadow, merging with the shadows of the forgotten. Behind him, the wind pushed the door shut with a soft thud. The darkness swallowed them whole. James lifted the flashlight higher, squared his shoulders, and whispered again. This time not as a declaration, but as a promise, "We're home, Max. We're finally home." The night inside Northstar Point Observatory settled like a heavy blanket, dense, silent, absolute. James Harris lay on his thin cot in the former library, surrounded by towering shelves of abandoned star charts and dusty, forgotten equipment. Only the dim lantern beside him cast a trembling glow, barely keeping the darkness at bay. His flannel jacket lay across his chest, like armor, yet beneath it, his heart beat too fast, like panic whispering through old scars. Max, his German Shepherd companion, curled against James's left side, a warm shield between him and the shadows gathering at the edges of memory. Sleep did not come gently, but it finally dragged him down. And then, without warning, the hum returned. It began not as a sound, but a sensation, a vibration rising through the cold concrete floor, sliding like a serpent up his spine. It resonated inside his bones, deep and low, as though the mountain itself exhaled in a frequency only trauma could translate. The familiarity of it struck him like a blow. His eyes shot open. His hands were suddenly trembling. The darkness around him warped into the suffocating metallic cold of the underground drone control station, where he had spent too many nights taking lives he would never know. He could hear it again in his mind, the server racks humming endlessly, the comms static hissing like living electricity. He remembered the joystick in his hand, the rubber grip slick under a sweating palm, and the dead silence before a missile struck. That silence had been the worst part. Death should scream, should shatter the air like broken glass. But instead, it always vanished quietly, like it had never been alive. His chest constricted. His breath tripped over itself, gasping. He pressed a shaking hand to the floor. The vibration grew stronger, so real he could swear he was back in that windowless bunker. Max stirred instantly. The dog's ears pricked his head, lifting sharply, golden brown eyes locking onto James's face. Sensing the terror surging through his owner, Max pressed his body fully against James's ribcage, grounding him with weight and warmth. A soft, insistent whine rose from the dog's throat, a reminder that the world he was drowning in wasn't real, not anymore. James grabbed fistfuls of Max's fur, squeezing as if the dog were the only thing anchoring him to the present. "I'm here. I'm here," he muttered, though the words felt like lies. It took long minutes before his heartbeat began to slow, before the darkness loosened its claws enough for him to breathe properly. Once the panic faded to a dull ache, James sat up, wiping cold sweat from his brow. Max remained pressed to his legs, alert and ready to react again. That loyalty cut into him deeper than any nightmare. He didn't deserve this creature's unwavering trust, but he needed it. The hum finally subsided, fading back into the ground like a retreating tide. But its echo lingered in his chest. James stood reaching for his flashlight. "Let's find what's causing that," he whispered through. Part of him hoped they wouldn't. Max padded silently beside him as they descended the narrow stairs into the basement, a concrete underbelly lined with pipes that groaned with age. Frost crept along the lower edges of the walls, and the air tasted of dust and metal. The beam of the flashlight cut through darkness until it landed on a door marked with a rusted, crooked plaque, "Research Wing. Authorized personnel only." The text had faded, but James could still make out the name stenciled just below, half covered by time and flaking paint, Professor Malcolm Reed, Director. Reed, the name the locals had mentioned. The missing astronomer with more theories than friends. James ran a hand over the lettering. "What were you doing down here, Professor?" he murmured. Max sniffed at the base of the door tail, stiff posture alert. There was something on the other side, something neither of them fully understood. The door was locked, but age had weakened it. With a sharp shove from his shoulder, an action that sent a jolt of pain through his aging joints, the wood splintered enough for him to wedge it open. A rancid gust of stale air spilled out thick with the scent of chemicals long expired. He coughed, stepping inside. The room beyond was a time capsule. Old reel-to-reel recorders, metal filing cabinets with peeling labels, a chalkboard covered in equations that meant nothing to James, but hinted at obsession lines connecting numbers to sketches of the mountain's geology and star alignment charts. And pinned to the center of the board, like the beating heart of Reed's paranoia, was a map detailing subterranean formations beneath the observatory. Thick red ink circled a section marked simply Source. James's flashlight trembled in his hand. He stepped closer. The circled region was directly beneath their feet. That was when he noticed the file cabinet shoved awkwardly against the back wall, almost as if hiding something. Max approached it, ears back, nose twitching. The fur along his spine bristled. He gave a low growl, not of aggression, but warning. James's pulse quickened, but curiosity shoved fear aside. He pushed the cabinet with both hands. It screeched painfully across the floor and revealed a section of wall unlike the rest. The concrete was smoother, newer, sealed shut, with industrial precision. Someone had deliberately concealed this. James pressed his palm to the sealed wall. It thrummed faintly under his touch, the same pulse that had jerked him awake. This wasn't structural settling. It wasn't the wind. It was a message. His throat tightened. What if Reed hadn't disappeared? What if he was buried behind this wall? The thought twisted his stomach. The hum deepened for a moment, vibrating up his arm like something inside was responding to him. He stumbled backward, heart hammering again. Max barked sharply, this time the sound echoing off the concrete like a gunshot. Footsteps above. A groan of shifting wood. The building seemed to react to the vibration, awake and restless. "Max," he whispered, "we need air." They climbed back upstairs, the basement door closing slowly behind them, as though pushed by invisible fingers. The hum faded once more into silence. James grabbed his coat and stepped outside into the frigid night. He breathed deep, letting the cold burn through the remnants of fear. Max stayed close, his warmth steady against James's thigh. Overhead, the sky glittered with distant stars, constant, indifferent witnesses to his unraveling. "I came here for quiet," he said aloud, his voice a brittle whisper. "But you're not quiet, are you?" A faint tremor rippled through the snow beneath his boots, as if the earth itself answered. James looked down at Max, and the dog looked back, ears tilted forward in a question they both felt but couldn't voice. They were not alone here. The morning after the hum rattled through his dreams, James Harris woke with a resolve hardened, like the frost clinging to the observatory windows. He didn't need another night trapped inside his own head, fighting memories that had already exacted their toll. He needed answers, answers buried in concrete and silence. Max sensed the urgency before his master even stood up. The German shepherd paced restlessly, nails clacking on the cracked basement floor, nose pressed once again against that single suspicious stretch of wall. The dog's muscles were tense beneath his sable coat-tail, rigid not in fear but an alertness that told James more than any spoken warning. This wasn't random curiosity. Something on the other side of that wall was demanding to be found. James wiped his palms on his flannel, feeling the worn softness of the fabric against his calloused skin. He set the old lantern on a nearby crate, its flickering glow illuminating dust, dancing like ghosts in the air. The sledgehammer rested at his feet, heavy, scarred, familiar. It reminded him of construction detail during his early military years, back when breaking down physical barriers felt like a job, instead of a metaphor for everything inside him that remained locked and suffocating. "All right, Max," he muttered, gripping the hammer's handle. "Let's see what you've been trying to tell me." The first strike sent a shock up his injured shoulder, a reminder of shrapnel that had once torn flesh and bone in a desert half a world away, where sunlight became a blade. But that pain only fueled him. The hammer rose and fell again and again, each hit chipping away time and secrets. Max stood guard, ears perked at every crack echoing through the basement. Hours passed, sweat soaked through James's red and black flannel, dripping into the cold dust in dark splotches. Every blow was a fight, not just against concrete, but against the ghosts that tried to drag him backward. At some point, he forgot about exhaustion, forgot about pain. There was only the rhythm hammer to wall, breath to lungs, heart to purpose. By nightfall, the wall showed signs of surrender, hairline fractures snaking outward like veins. James stopped only when his muscles trembled too violently to lift the hammer. Max nudged his leg, guiding him upstairs, keeping him upright when his knees threatened to buckle. They rested. They ate. They slept uneasily. Then they returned. On the second day, the final blow sent a rumbling crack through the wall. Masonry shattered. A cloud of suffocating dust erupted as a panel collapsed inward into a hollow void. The air that drifted out was stale thick, untouched by breath or breeze for decades. Max barked sharply, tail whipping behind him, excited, triumphant, ready. James lifted the lantern and stared into the opening. A hidden room. Another part of the observatory sealed away deliberately. He took a step inside. The ground crunched beneath his boots, glass gravel. He pointed the lantern downward. It was salt scattered thickly across the threshold, as if someone had once tried to ward off something. That unnerved him more than the collapsing wall. Inside, the dust lay thick like snow, blanketing everything. Metal shelves sagging under the weight of ancient equipment. Glass jars filled with core samples from the bowels of the earth, and a desk that looked like the last place anyone had sat before the entire world forgot this room existed. In the center of the desk were two objects untouched by time's decay. A thick leather-bound journal, a small reel-to-reel tape recorder. His breath stopped. Professor Reed's presence hummed in the room like a lingering soul. James brushed dust from the journal's cover, his gloved fingers revealing initials burned into the leather MR. He opened to the first page, and a neat, sharp handwriting spilled open, a mind consumed by discovery. Reed had documented everything. Measurements, anomalies, seismic readings, electromagnetic patterns that made no scientific sense. But the entries soon shifted. Tones changed. Words trembled between fear and awe. The quartz body beneath the observatory was massive, almost alive in the way it conducted and amplified unknown signals. It wasn't simply reacting to geological pressure. It was communicating, receiving, and sending. An energy not natural, Reed wrote. Something ancient. Something intelligent. James swallowed. The memory of that bone-shaking hum crawled through him again. He kept reading. Reed wrote of voices without sound, visions that came while awake, lights under the earth that pulsed like a heartbeat. At first, Reed believed he had stumbled on a scientific phenomenon that would change humanity's understanding of the planet. But then came the warnings, men in suits, threats hidden behind professional smiles, questions about his research he had never revealed. Terracore mining. They wanted what lay beneath the mountain, and they wanted it silenced. James turned to the final entry. The handwritten letters staggered wildly, as though fear guided the pen they know. If I disappear, truth lies here. His stomach tightened. He glanced at Max, who stood stiff eyes locked on a far corner of the room, where darkness collected like a physical shape. "We're not done yet," James said softly. The tape recorder clicked as his thumb brushed the play button, but when he pressed it, only static howled, warped, and shredded. Max growled low. The static wasn't random. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the hum beneath the observatory. Without warning, the lantern flickered violently. Tools rattled. The ground trembled, gentle at first, then more insistent, like a warning or a plea. James braced a hand on the desk. "Okay?" "Okay," he breathed, voice cracking. "We hear you." The vibration slowed. The lantern steadied. Silence returned, but not the comforting kind. Max pressed against James's legs as though urging him back away upstairs to air and stars and sanity. James nodded. Not out of fear, out of respect. Whatever Reed had discovered wasn't finished being understood. They stepped through the broken wall and into the basement's stale cold. As James turned back, he saw the newly revealed doorway framed in lantern light, like a mouth opened after decades of holding its breath. And he realized something. The wall wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. The morning light in Fairbanks was thin and washed with pale gold, the kind that filtered through rows of frost-covered spruce as though the sun itself feared the Alaskan cold. James Harris drove slowly, his hands steady on the steering wheel, despite the tension knotted beneath his red and black flannel. Max sat upright beside him, alert ears perked toward every passing sound. The German shepherd's breath fogged the window as he watched the snowy world glide by outside. James's mind was anything but still. Last night, after reading Reed's journal, by the dim light of the lantern, he had lain awake for hours, staring into the darkness, haunted not by memories of war, but by the possibility that Reed's silence had been forced upon him. There was only one place to take the truth the people whose land the earth itself seemed to protect. Fairbanks was no bustling city, but compared to the lonely mountain, it felt overwhelming. Headlights, voices, snowplows scraping the roads, the occasional plume of steam rising from diners where people sought warmth and coffee. Max's tail thumped anxiously, sensing his owner's nerves. James parked outside the Fairbanks Native Cultural Center, a low building of cedar and glass, adorned with metal art, depicting ravens and northern lights. He took a moment, hand resting on Max's neck, feeling the dog's steady warmth grounding him. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and sage, with framed photographs of elders lining the walls. They showed sharp-eyed men and women, proud and unbroken. A receptionist, Naomi Graywater, a young Athabascan woman with straight black hair, braided thick over one shoulder, and warm copper-brown skin, looked up as they walked in. Her dark eyes were cautious, but not unkind. She couldn't have been more than 25, yet she carried herself with a quiet confidence, the type that comes from long cultural memory rather than personal years. "What can we help you with?" she asked, voice steady, though her gaze flickered to Max, respectful but wary. James cleared his throat. Social interaction hadn't been his strong suit since everything. I need to speak to your counsel. It's important." Naomi lifted a brow. "Everyone thinks their business is important." "What kind of important?" He placed Reed's leather-bound journal on the desk, as though offering a sacred artifact. Naomi's expression changed, not trusting yet, but curious. "Wait here," she said quickly, disappearing through a pair of wooden doors carved with images of caribou. The wait felt longer than his worst missions overseas. Max sat obediently by his feet, tail wrapped around his paws, eyes fixed on the door like a sentinel. Eventually, Naomi returned and led them into a conference room. Posters of constellations hung beside woven tapestries of rivers and forests. 3 people waited. The first was a woman, Marjorie Swift-Fox, mid-40s, perhaps tall and slim, like a willow in winter. Her face was angular, her deep-set eyes sharp with suspicion. Jet black hair streaked lightly with silver fell just below her shoulders. Her voice when she spoke was controlled and diplomatic, but with steel beneath. "You're the man who bought the observatory." It wasn't a question. Next to her stood Daniel Pike, younger, around 30. Broad-shouldered and wearing a plaid shirt, tucked neatly into worn denim, he looked like someone who worked with his hands, steady, practical, direct. A short beard covered his jaw, trimmed but rugged, and his hazel eyes revealed equal parts protectiveness and skepticism. He crossed his arms clearly, unwilling to trust anything easily. At the head of the table sat Elias Crow, the tribal elder. He must have been well into his 70s, with long silver hair tied at his back and skin creased by years of wisdom rather than age. His eyes were warm, deep, almost ancient, like someone who had seen too many cycles of history repeat, but was still waiting for humanity to learn. He wore a dark wool coat decorated with beadwork patterns, mountains, rivers, stars. James swallowed hard. "Thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" Marjorie asked, fingers steepled. "What does a stranger want with us?" He opened the journal to a page Reed had marked with a folded corner. As he spoke, explaining the hidden room, the quartz vein, the threat of Terracor. His voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the truth pressing forward. Marjorie's expression remained icy. Daniel drummed his fingers on the table impatiently. Max remained seated at James's heel, perfectly still, understanding the seriousness in the room. Then James placed the small tape recorder on the table and pressed play. The voice that spilled out was from half a century ago, sharp, arrogant, dripping with disdain. Your people are standing on a gold mine, whether you know it or not. We will dig. And if you resist, well, progress doesn't wait for barbarians. The silence afterward was thick and painful. Daniel's jaws clenched. Marjorie inhaled sharply through her nose, fury simmering beneath her calm appearance. But it was Elder Elias who responded. He pressed his palm gently over the recorder, shutting down the ghostly voice. You have brought us the missing piece, he said quietly, voice rough with emotion. My father warned the old community about the strangers in suits. They promised prosperity. But the earth does not prosper when carved open for greed. He stood walking slowly around the table, his footsteps soft but purposeful. When he reached James, he placed a hand on his shoulder. His grip was firm, warm, reassuring. You are a soldier, Elias said, looking deeply into his eyes. You understand what it means to protect. And you have chosen to protect us without being asked. That is not a small thing. James felt his throat tighten. I don't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. Marjorie glanced at him, really looked this time not at the scruffy beard or the worn flannel, but at the man beneath scars and silence. Something softened in her stance. Daniel spoke next. His voice was rough, but less guarded. So what's your plan? Go public fight Terracor? James hesitated. I don't know yet, but I know I can't handle this alone. Elias nodded. Then you won't. He motioned for them to follow. Naomi joined as they stepped outside into the crisp air. Snowflakes had begun to fall, soft, delicate, like the sky, exhaling. They led James and Max to the rear courtyard where a traditional fire pit glowed. Elders and youth gathered, some curious, others protective, all watching. Elias spoke to them in their native language, words that rolled like river stones carrying story and authority. People turned their eyes toward James, measuring this outsider who carried dangerous truths. Max sat tall beside him, tail curled neatly, looking straight ahead like a soldier at inspection. After the elder finished speaking, the fire crackled louder, as if acknowledging a pact. Elias faced James once more. You have awakened a story our land tried to bury, he said. Professor Reed tried to warn us. Now you carry that warning. James breathed out a cloud of white. So what do we do? Elias smiled, small but confident. We fight with truth and with unity. Marjorie stepped forward, extending her hand. The earlier suspicion had melted into determination. Welcome to the fight, Mr. Harris. Daniel gave a curt nod, as though accepting James not as a stranger, but as someone who finally showed up to help defend what mattered. Max wagged his tail once sharply, a canine oath. James looked around at the gathered faces, some hardened by history, others bright with hope, and something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he did not feel like he was hiding from a war. He felt like he had joined a cause worth fighting for. Elias rested a hand over his heart. From today forward, you are no longer alone. And for the first time in a very, very long time, James believed him. Snow drifted lightly across the roof of the Northstar Point Observatory, each flake catching the faint glow of the newly restored exterior lights, like tiny falling stars returning home. Inside, laughter and excitement replaced dust and silence, sounds the observatory had not heard in half a century. James Harris stood in the center of the main rotunda, one hand resting on the smooth, polished railing that circled the grand telescope. His red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket looked almost ceremonial now, as though he wore the uniform of a duty finally fulfilled. The old man had a weary dignity in his posture, but there was a new steadiness too. Something inside him had been rebuilt alongside the observatory itself. The restoration had taken months of hard labor teamwork and endless paperwork. With the Athabascan Tribal Council's support and the legal firepower of a tenacious young indigenous lawyer named Ben Talltree, a large corporate settlement had been secured from terracore mining. Ben was lean and athletic, mid-30s, with thick, dark hair, always tied neatly back, and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. He carried a quiet intensity shaped by years of watching corporations underestimate his people and having to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously. His determination had turned Reed's lost truth into undeniable justice. A story he had said during negotiations is the one thing even corporations cannot outrun. Now that story had built something new. Today was opening night of the Northstar Youth Astronomy and Earth Science Center. The once rusted dome was newly gilded with restored copper glowing faintly under the cold Alaskan moonlight. The telescope's massive lens, cleaned, repaired, shimmering, was pointed skyward once again, hungry for the infinite. Dozens of teenagers from the local Athabascan community milled excitedly through the observatory, guided by volunteer educators and elders. Among them was Maya Crow Elias's 13-year-old granddaughter. She was a slender girl with long raven black hair, braided with tiny silver beads that glimmered under the light. Her skin was warm bronze, and freckles dusted her cheeks like scattered constellations. Despite her shy demeanor, her dark eyes sparkled with curiosity, the kind that made her linger longest beside the telescope, asking questions faster than even Ben or the visiting scientists could answer. Max trotted among the kids like a celebrity tail swaying proudly. He paused to let small hands rub his thick fur, occasionally licking fingertips and earning more giggles. His once sharp posture of constant vigilance had relaxed into something softer, happier. He seemed to understand that this noise was good noise, these crowds were not danger, but belonging. Near the control panel stood Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a visiting astrophysicist from Anchorage University. In her early 50s, she carried an air of confident intellect. Tall, with silver-streaked auburn hair loosely pinned at the back, she wore thin rectangular glasses and a charcoal coat dusted with snow crystals. Her handshake was firm, and her keen gray eyes studied people with genuine interest, not judgment. She joined the effort after hearing about Reed's work and the energy anomaly beneath the observatory. Where others saw threat, she saw discovery. Some during negotiations had warned her the site was cursed. She simply smiled and said, "Then let's uncurse it with science." James watched all of them with quiet awe. These were not the silent walls and ghosts he first encountered. The observatory was alive, breathing through voices, footsteps, and the beating excitement of young hearts. Elias Crow approached him, wrapped in a ceremonial robe embroidered with northern lights. His lined face held pride and peace. "You gave our children a place to look up again," he said. "A place where the future is not something to be afraid of." Elias's hand rested on James's shoulder, steady, warm. "Reed would be proud, and so would your brothers who never came home." James swallowed hard. He had not spoken of his fallen comrades in a long time. Their memory was a weight he believed only he could carry. Now, for the first time, someone else was helping him hold it. From across the hall, Marjorie Swiftfox, still sharp-eyed, but now softened by hope, called everyone to gather. "It's time," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd as they formed a loose circle beneath the massive dome. James stepped forward to the central control panel. His fingers hovered a second above the brass switch that would open the telescope dome. He looked down at Max, who sat tall beside him, tail thumping once with calm certainty. James almost laughed. "You ready too, partner?" The dog's ears flicked in what could only be described as his version of a nod. James flipped the switch. With a deep mechanical rumble, this one no longer frightening, no longer triggering, the observatory came to life. Motors whirred, gears groaned gently, and the great dome began to rotate. The panels slid open like a blooming flower, revealing a velvet sky dusted with a million stars that gleamed brighter than any memory of war or sorrow. Gasps filled the room. Maya clasped her hands beneath her chin, eyes wide, chatter caught in her throat. Even Evelyn's usual professional composure slipped, her awe unmasked. The earth beneath them hummed again, that same deep frequency James once feared. But tonight, it carried a different weight, no longer a threat, but a presence, a heartbeat, a song from the land beneath their feet, steady and ancient. James closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound wash through him. Instead of darkness, he saw light. Instead of screens and explosions, he saw children looking up. And instead of being a keeper of ghosts, he was a steward of wonder. He whispered, barely louder than the wind outside. "We did it, Max." The German shepherd leaned his head against James's thigh, eyes reflecting starlight. As the children took their turns peering into the telescope, cheering each time a new planet or distant galaxy swam into view, James stepped out onto the observation deck for a moment of air. Snowflakes brushed his beard and melted into his flannel. He gazed up. Not targets, not coordinates, not threats, just stars, endless and forgiving. He spoke softly, as though addressing the sky itself. "Finally, we've found our purpose, old friend." The hum beneath the observatory pulsed once strong and steady, like the mountain was answering him. In the quiet glow beneath the reopened dome, the story leaves a final reminder: miracles rarely arrive with thunder. They come softly, like a loyal dog nudging you back to life, or a stranger offering help when you least expect it. Some say it's fate, others call it grace, but many believe it's God placing the right people in our path, exactly when our hearts are ready. Just as James found purpose again in a place the world had forgotten. Each of us carries a light meant to shine even through seasons of cold and silence. Hold on to that hope. Look for the small wonders in your everyday life. They are often the quiet fingerprints of God guiding you forward. If this story touched your heart, share it so others might find a little hope too. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your journey wherever you are tonight.